First house is entry into this world. First house is body. First house is simply the personality, the overall personality. So it is only the first house which makes all the 12 houses work. Because if you have the body in this world, only then everything else works out. If you don't have the body, then there's nothing. There's no point of discussing any other house, right? So the first house is that. Second house is when you arrive in this world, the immediate thing that you have is the family around. That is why the second house is the house of Kutum. It is about the first food that you have, the basic meal, the basic sense of inputs, the basic sense of what all you can eat, consume for your health, and liquid money. Because how do you eat? You have like saliva in your mouth. So second house also deals with the saliva, the salts that are there in the form of the fluid, the first fluid. And that's why the second house also is called the liquid money. And that is liquid, and that is the money that you have to start eating the food with. Third house is the extended family, which is not the immediate family, but extended family, like your cousins, your like your siblings, your brother, your sister, your uncles, your aunties, your extended family, the world outside, the world around. And fourth house is the house that deals with whatever you have, the resources, the basic facilities that you have. That's why the comfort is related to that house, because the resources are equivalent to the comfort. More the resources, more comfort you gain. But that comfort, whether it is actually required or not required, that depends on the sense of the being. Then what else is there in the fourth house? Whatever is there in the house that you just are living in, that is fourth house. So wherever you are living right now as house, you are dealing with the fourth house. Then fifth house is basically the basic knowledge, the basic understanding, the basic learnings that you have in your life, and which is not there in the world anymore, because the basics are not there. There's only how to prepare beings for being part of the establishment workforce. That is what is there in the world today. So fifth house is not dealt with today in this world, in this day and age. People don't deal with the fifth house because they're not interested in the basic learnings. They're more interested in learning whatever makes them earn through the system only, nothing to do with their birth or anything like that. Sixth house is my favorite house, because sixth house is the house which controls all 12 houses, because it deals with your day-to-day. And in my perspective, sixth house is the house of code of conduct. It is a house of discipline. It is house of day-to-day. So whatever you do in your day-to-day, so that actually affects all the 12 houses, the rest of the 12 houses. And sixth house is more important because it is exactly the opposite house to 12th, the house of liberation. So whatever you do in your sixth, that by default can bridge with the 12th house, can form an axis with it, and one can liberate only by dealing with the sixth house. Seventh house is all the people that you're dealing with on everyday basis, because whatever people you deal with, you are interacting with them, you're doing certain kind of businesses with them, you have some affairs to handle with them. So seventh house is basically the house of dealing with people, not only the marriage, because it is very today's context of like seventh house, but seventh house means dealing with people, but it's like a minimal level of dealing. It is like limited dealing with only few. That is seventh house. Then comes the eighth house. Eighth house is the house of all what you cannot see on the surface. That is why it is the house of the underground. So eighth house is whatever is behind the scene, what all forces are working. So eighth house can be the house of learning to know about this matrix. It is the house of to explore what all forces are, how those forces are working, how those forces are controlling this whole reality, what all this construct is about. So eighth house is one of the most important house when it comes to exiting this plane, or for those people who are into the spiritual practices. Then for spiritual practices and to elevate one's learning, whatever is required is the ninth house. So that is about higher discipline. It is about the tapasya. It is about doing something beyond the worldly level. It is about the extra effort that you put in to your everyday basis or everyday routine. So ninth house is the house of higher education. So whatever you learn extra, that actually sets your destiny. That's why ninth house is related to bhagya. Bhagya means destination, ultimate goal. Then 10th house is all about actions, karma, whether in terms of earning, whether in terms of whatever good points, reward points, or punya that you gain, that is 10th house. And 11th house is about income. So whatever action you take in the 10th house, that by default becomes the input for the 11th, and then 11th house becomes the gain. So it is the house of ambition. It shows that how ambitious a being can be. So if your basics are good in the 5th house, then 11th house by default becomes very good. Otherwise 11th house also doesn't work. If your basics are not intact, then 11th house does not give its fruit. So 11th house is the house of ambition, it is the house of goal, it is the house of giving you more and more income, not only in terms of money but in terms of good results and opulences, and in case of the comforts, sukh. And then 12th house is the house of exiting this plane. So whatever you do in your rest of the 11 houses, one has to disconnect and cut from that and disconnect from that and reap its benefit in the 12th. So 12th house is the house of detachment, and it is house of expanse. Generally people call it the house of vyay, means the expense, but in my perspective it is the house of avyay, means the expanse. Avyay means which you can have eternally. So 12th house is the house of transcending from this plane.